Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you very much. I just wanted to start this. I had planned to do this a little bit later, leading up in a month's time, Black History Month and everything, but it's not really what Black History Month should be about. And it actually works if I do this now and then move on to Jeremiah. And also it's kind of relevant because of what's happening in Haiti at the moment, and Kenya going there and stuff like that. And like I said the other day, something really upset me in the morning, and it had to do with this subject. And it was just a lot of people don't know this, don't know stuff and the opinions and everything, and it's just all part of knowledge is power, you know, and just we can never go forward without knowing what happened, and wounds can't heal, and understandings, and just helps you know what's going on today. And because we don't know as everyday people, the ruling class can always repeat the same thing and control us, and the same playbooks and everything. Anyway, I'm just going to start with a little bit introduction. Black Jacobins. The West Indian slave colonies had emerged from the mid-17th century onwards on the back of imported Africans toiling primarily on sugar plantations. The sugar industry became a remarkable source of wealth and material well-being for those involved, for shippers and traders, for merchants and financiers, and for the domestic economies of the participating European maritime powers. By turns, the Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, English, and the French all sought to establish their own new world-based sugar industry. Of course, slaves produced a range of other tropical staples, notably tobacco, coffee, and rice, but sugar remained their preeminent activity. We think nothing of sugar these days, like yeah, one lump or two sugar, you know, but sugar changed the world dramatically, like especially for the making coffee more palatable. Coffee just skyrocketed after sugar. It made foods taste different, everything. Sugar was the thing. And it just allowed so many industries to excel. So many things. And we think nothing of it today. But sugar was so important. The riches made from sugar. And it went around, and just something as small as sugar just dramatically changed everything. But sugar remained their preeminent activity. The British Islands, led by Barbados, then from the early 18th century by Jamaica, established themselves as wealth-gathering colonies, though not, of course, for the people who made it possible, the Africans and their local-born offspring. This rise of slave-based British economic strength was paralleled by the emergence of British military and strategic power in the Atlantic. But by the mid-18th century, they were challenged by the French, whose own slave islands, Martinique, Guadeloupe, San Domingo, and St. Lucia, disgorged growing prosperity to France and its maritime and mercantile groups. You see, for the wealth of major companies and everything, they get the military involved, and these are things we have to look out for today. You know, just for the wealth of certain families and certain companies and industries, the military is going in there and doing horrors. Like I said before, like, a dog will be a dog, but it's your dog. You know, the dog is now chasing away the birds and eating the bread. A dog will be a dog, but it's your dog. But by the mid-18th century, they were challenged by the French, whose own slave islands, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Saint Domingo, disclosed growing prosperity to France and its maritime and mercantile groups. Saint Dominique, the western part of the island of Hispaniola, soon dominated French Caribbean interests. By the mid-18th century, Saint Dominique's sugar industry and coffee industry at the high altitudes posed a serious threat to Jamaica's claim to be the preeminent slave colony in the region. Africans had been shipped into Saint Dominique in remarkable numbers. The 47,000 in 1720 had grown to 80,000 in 1930. Thereafter, the growth was explosive. 172,000 by 1754, and rising more dramatically still between 1763 and 1789, from 206,000 to 465, 500,000 basically. The island's sugar and coffee plantations were teeming with and made possible by Africans. And you just think of how many people on the ships, how many people were thrown overboard, how many people died. There had never been such a huge movement of Africans in such a short period into the American colonies. It formed a volatile mix which was then ignited by events in France, 1789. The ramifications of French ideas of liberty, equality and fraternity were dramatic enough in France. In those colonies devoted to the idea that black humanity was less than human, such ideals had a seismic effect. In those colonies devoted to the idea that black humanity was less than human, such ideals had a seismic effect, with shockwaves rippling onwards from the French islands throughout the Americas. If equality were accepted, slavery was doomed. The ideas of democratic revolution were the solvent of the French ancient regime, and little seemed more archaic, more out of kilter with a European world increasingly influenced by Enlightenment ideals and by a belief in its own attachment to progress, than the barbarism of black slavery. Here again, James saw the heart of the problem long before others. His natural brilliance, honed by a traditional British education, lovingly described in Beyond a Boundary, and his researches in France in the 1930s brought a distinctive and up to then unique Caribbean analysis of what happened before and after 1979. The initial reactions in 1789. The initial reactions to 1789 in Saint Dominique took the form of debates about who should represent whom in Paris, but it was a process which thoroughly destabilized a Saint Dominique society consisting of a huge African slave force, a colored middle class, which mixed race, a white plantocracy, and a colonial government in the hands of French officials. The political turmoil in France was replicated in Saint Dominique, but with unprecedented consequences. As different groups squabbled, brown with white, middle class with upper class, French with colonial, the Africans seized the moment. In the growing political confusion, control over the slaves loosened and slaves rose in revolt. First in the north, Within a month, 40,000 slaves had joined in, and Saint Dominique was swiftly convulsed by slave revolt. From a complexity of inspirations, African, European, Caribbean, the slave revolt was driven forward by the destructive powers of an army of ex-slaves, led by an increasingly confident and tactically brilliant leadership, notably under Toussaint Louverture. The old colonial and plantocratic edifice was simply swept away by black armies, which dealt similar devastating blows to invading Spanish and British forces. Parisian debates about racial equality and slave emancipation merely accelerated the ex-slaves' progress towards freedom. The British were intent on taking advantage of their adversaries' misfortunes and keen to add that lucrative colony to their own string of Caribbean possessions. The old colonial and plantocratic edifice was simply swept away by black armies, which dealt similar devastating blows to invading Spanish and British forces. You see, we'll get loads of old war movies about the numerous wars over the centuries. We'll get loads of slave movies, but nobody will ever do this one. Nobody will ever do it because it's too powerful. And you know, devastating blows to invading Spanish and British forces. Not only just the French. Nobody would do this film. Ridley Scott, nobody. Steve McQueen, you should have an interest in these things. No, you should want to do this film. Anton Fuqua, no, nobody wants to do it because you can't. They won't let you do it. It's too embarrassing. And a lot of this stuff is embarrassing in here. And you got beaten by half-naked, barefoot African slaves. Again and again and again. The British were intent on taking advantage of their adversaries' misfortunes and keen to add that lucrative colony to their own string of Caribbean possessions. However, they found themselves, like the French, sucked into an unwinnable colonial war, with thousands of men succumbing to warfare and disease. A whole British army was effectively devoured by Saint-Domingue. People at home began to ask the question, were the slave colonies really worth such sacrifice? Whole armies effectively devoured. And back home in Britain they're saying, oh, is it pointless? So many men who thought they were fighting for Queen and country were just died. A whole army was effectively devoured. A whole army was effectively devoured. The corporate greed. Warfare in Saint-Domingue continued throughout the 1790s. Napoleon was determined to restore plantation slavery and to use Saint-Domingue as a base for operations in the region. A huge new French army arrived, their main success being to l'ouverture to a miserable death. A huge new French army arrived, their main success being to lure l'ouverture to a miserable death. Lured him to a miserable death in France. So reading this on, this is the second time I'm reading this, right? It's hard because so many things are just running through my mind at the moment while reading this. Like, this dude begged and pleaded. Like, he begged and pleaded. They thought we were lesser men. We proved we could fight. We proved we could win. We even proved that even though we couldn't even read or write, we could still be military strategists, and won. The colony did survive, and it was thriving at the moment. And all he was asking Napoleon, just let me lead. We can't trust these people. They're gonna torture us. They don't know how to be fair. Let me lead. We'll do it the French way. And all this time he had the support of the actual people in France, just the normal people, because they admired it, because they saw themselves in the revolution in Haiti, because they had just gone through the French Revolution. They saw themselves. They admired the black slaves taking their freedoms. But when you have these certain people, these rich ruling classes, who have totally different mindsets to everyone else, it's not going to happen. And he tried. He knew that he needed the whites, the white workers, and he needed the rich whites, the plantation owners, because the slaves were uneducated. They couldn't read. It wouldn't have been possible. But he opened up schools and everything. So in the future, but Napoleon kept on sending people to sabotage and infiltrate. So many traitors, so many infiltrators and everything. And people see this as mistakes, but he knew they wouldn't. It could never be free and independent. We see in that today, how Haiti is today. They could never do it alone until and he tried. He wanted to do it together. And he some people wanted to kill all the whites, but he protected them. He treated them well. He gave them back their mansions and their homes. He put society back together again. But the race hatred was just too much. Was it a phrase in here? Not a single epaulette will be left on the shoulders of a nigger. That was Napoleon's stance. He couldn't stand to see them leading and to see the colony thriving under free slaves and black leadership. Warfare in Saint-Dominique continued throughout the 1790s. Napoleon was determined to restore plantation slavery and to use Saint-Dominique as a base for operations in the region. A huge new French army arrived, their main success being to lure Louverture to a miserable death in France. Excuse me. But they faced a black guerrilla army determined to fight against the revival of slavery. The ex-slaves won again. The depleted French forces departed for France, and on the 1st of January 1804, Louverture's successor Dessalines declared Haitian independence. Haiti was the first black republic outside of Africa and the second post-colonial society of the modern era after the USA. En route, the ex-slaves, their armies, their leaders, their guerrillas had defeated invading British, Spanish and French armies. It had been a stunning reversal not merely of European arms, but of the racial fundamentals which underpinned the Atlantic system. The European masters had been defeated by their African helots in an unprecedented turnaround of racial fortunes. Slave owners everywhere realized and feared the implications of the events in Haiti. It formed in a violent brew of international rivalries, rival antipathies, and ideological clashes. The planters' worst nightmares of slaves seized of their own equality, armed and able to topple planters and colonial governments alike. It is an extraordinary story. It is easy now to see why it caught James's attention. For a man of James's inclinations and passions as a Marxist, anti-colonialist, and an emergent spokesman for the neglected and marginalized black masses of the Caribbean, the events in Saint-Dominique had an irreversible resonance. For a start, the language of French revolutionary fervor of liberty, equality and fraternity had not lost its disruptive implications for a colonial world which James sought to end. The emergence of an independent black republic in the Caribbean from the miseries of slavery clearly had huge attractive intellectual and political appeal to a writer seeking both to make sense of his regional past and to point towards solutions to continuing injustices. The events of the 1790s were thus at once a compelling and untold story and a morality tale with massive contemporary implications. Now it goes on, and then we've got some guy trying to debunk him a little bit, saying now, oh, he's got some of this wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. And the comment here which says, that despite the vast accumulation of detail and argument advanced by armies of scholars, and it's like, okay, why should we trust you? Because again and again throughout time you've just covered tracks and made lies and replaced and changed stories. And an army of scholars, like, it's just like, what the same army of scholars who were, you know, telling us about the Bible. That's an army of scholars like that. Is that what you mean? This guy might be right. The dude may have made mistakes in writing this book, but he's talking about, oh, we know so much more now, and da, 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 da. But as I read this book and I see how embarrassing it is, I just think, no, I can't trust what you've said there, dude. So we're just going to skip on to the foreword. The Black Jacobins was first published in England 1938, but I had written on the subject before I had left Trinidad in 1932. I had had the idea for some time. I was tired of reading and hearing about Africans being persecuted and oppressed in Africa, in the Middle Passage, in the USA, and all over the Caribbean. He was tired of hearing the same old stories, you know, just like we are today. Nobody will make a film of this book constantly. They've stopped doing it now, but every Black History Month, slavery, civil rights, slavery, just constantly us getting beaten. All we know is that our history started with slavery. You know, when there's so much history to bring out, there's so much truth to be told. But you know, we understand where we are now. We understand. We know now. I had the idea that for some time I was tired of reading and hear about Africans being persecuted and oppressed in Africa, in the Middle Passage, in the USA, and all over the Caribbean. I had made up my mind that I would write a book in which Africans or people of African descent, instead of constantly being the object of other people's exploitation and ferocity, would themselves be taking action on a grand scale and shaping other people to their own needs. The books on the Haitian Revolution that I had read were of no serious historical value. So as soon as I arrived in England in 1932, I began to look for materials and found only the same shallow ones I had read in the Caribbean. I immediately began to import books from France, which dealt seriously with the memorable event in French history. The book is dedicated to Harry and Elizabeth Spencer. Harry ran a tea shop and bakery and was a great friend of mine. He was a cultivated man, and I used to talk to him about my writing plans. Whenever a book came from France and I saw something exciting in it, I would report enthusiastically to him. One day he said to me, "Why are you always talking about this book? Why don't you write it?" I told him that I had to go to France, to the archives. I didn't have the money as yet, but I was saving. He asked me how much money I would need, and I told him about £100 I would need to start with. He left it there, but a few days afterwards put £90 in my hands and said, "On to France. If you need more, let me know." As soon as the summer season was over, I was a cricket reporter. As soon as the summer was over, I went and spent 6 months in France, covering ground at a tremendous rate. This book is so important, and you see how the friendships, the relationships, the friendships just between normal people, everyday people, can change history. God works in mysterious ways. His friend and his wife own a tea shop. They were good friends. He saw the guy's work. They were lovers of literature. And he get lent him the money. Like, go write your book, do the research. Now, who were Harry and Elizabeth Spencer? Were they black? Were they white? I'll leave you to answer that. I met in Paris Colonel Nemours, a Haitian who had written a military history of the War of Independence in San Domingo. Nemours was very happy to find someone, and that person a Caribbean, who was interested in the history of Haiti. He explained the whole thing to me in great detail, using books and coffee cups on a large table to show how the different campaigns had been fought. To this day, I am convinced that apart from Napoleon himself, no military commanders or strategists in 1973 to 1815 exceeded Toussaint Louverture and Dessalines. In England, I had been studying Marxism and had written a history of the Communist International, which involved a fairly close study of the Russian Revolution. In France, I read with profit and excitement writers like Jean Jaurès, Mathieu, and above all, Michelet. I was therefore specially prepared to write the Black Jacobins, not the least of my qualifications being the fact that I had spent most of my life in West Indian Island, not in fact too unlikely the territory of Haiti. At the same time, I was working closely with George Padmore and his black organisation, which was centred in London. As will be seen all over, and particularly in its last 3 pages, this book was written not with the Caribbean, but with the African in mind. One great virtue of the book is that it is solidly based upon the upheaval that was taking place in the world between 1789 and 1815. In addition, my West Indian experiences and my study of Marxism had made me see what had eluded my previous writers, that it was the slaves who had made the revolution. Many of the slave leaders to the end were unable to read or write, and in all the archives you can see, and admirable reports they are, in which many of the slave leaders to the end were unable to read or write, and in the archives you can see the reports, and admirable reports they are, in which the officer who made it traces his name in ink over a pencil draft prepared for him. So in this book it talks about how they're writing letters to all the captains and officers and such in the slave army, yeah, but these guys can't write, so this is where they had the educated whites helping and working, and they were writing the letters for them. Of course, there were some free blacks, educated blacks. There were free mixed race educated as well. But in the beginning, pencil draft for him. So he's signed his name. Somebody signed it for him, and then he's just going with his quill, tracing over it. In 1938, it's a long time ago, and I waited many years for other people to enter the lists and go further than I was able to go. I was never worried about what they would find, confident that my foundation would remain imperishable. Fouchard, an Haitian historian, has recently published a work which establishes that it was not so much the slaves, but the Maroons, those who had run away and made a life for themselves in the mountains or forests, who had led the revolution and created the foundation of the Haitian nation. Hitherto, I and other persons with whom I was politically associated had laid great emphasis on the fact that the slaves, gathered in hundreds at a time in the sugar factories of the North Plain, had owed much of their success to the fact that they had been disciplined, united and organized by the very mechanism of factory production. So just simple working life gave them these tools to come together, to talk, to strategize, and teamwork, basically basic teamwork skills and discipline. So you understand how these companies, they can take cheap labor to Asia, they can take cheap labor to all these other places, but they'll never take it to Africa. When Africa's just there from Europe, it's just there, but they'd rather go all the way over to the other side of the world. Look at Dyson, for instance, and now the man's name's been tarnished because of the slave labours which are being committed over there, and it's like, oh well, I didn't know, like, oh, we hire people to do these things, but it's under your name. Your name's on the factory, your name's on the product. You should be looking into these things, because when the scandals come out, it's your name. You can't just start pointing the blame. It's like, oh, but we hired these companies to do this, and no, this is under your name, and you're the one who took the work away from the country which the company was in, just to go and get your cheap labor abroad and make maximum profits. People Hitherto, I and the persons with whom I was politically associated had laid great emphasis on the fact that the slaves, gathered in hundreds at a time in the sugar factories of the North Plain, had owed much of their success to the fact that they had been disciplined, united and organized by the very mechanism of factory production. A Canadian student working on a thesis on the black masses in Haiti, in the Haiti Revolution, demonstrated that in the predominantly rural area of southern Haiti, the slaves, undisciplined by capitalist production, had gathered on a mountain in their search for independence, and persuaded to come back to the plantation, argued like any workers in advanced countries today. They wanted to have 3 days off from work or 2.5 days, or at least 2 days. So now we see that in the Caribbean, the slaves in revolution rural as well as urban, acted automatically as if they were in the second half of the 20th century. It is obvious to me today, as I saw in 1938, that further study of the revolution in French Saint Domingo will reveal more and more of its affinity with revolutions in more developed countries. Let me end this forward with one of the most remarkable experiences of black Jacobins. During the celebrations of the independence of Ghana in 1957, I met some Pan-African young men from South Africa who told me that my book had been of great service to them. I wondered how, and they explained to me. A copy of it was in the library of the Black University in South Africa, though they didn't know anything about it until a white professor there told them. I suggest that you read the book, The Black Jacobins, in the library. You may find it useful. Eagerly, they got the book. They read it and found it a revelation, particularly in the relation between the blacks and the mulattoes. That relation they found very important for understanding the relation between the black South Africans and the coloureds, who are people of mixed race, black and white. They typed out copies, mimeographed them, and circulated the passages from the Black Jacobins dealing with the relations between the blacks and the mixed in Haiti. I could not help thinking that revolution moves in a mysterious way its wonders to perform. There's so much in here, and those relations between the blacks. You see, what's happening is a lot of the men, the working men from there, they were having affairs and mistresses of the female slaves, and then loads of mixed race children were born. In here it says at some point, like over the years, there were 70,000 mixed race women prostitutes. I mean, these guys, they loved it. They loved the black women. They loved partaking, and then when the mixed race were born, they loved them as well. They just, it's the taboo. It's something new, something you've never tasted before, like forbidden fruits. And so many mixed race children were born, and some of these men, they loved their black mistresses. They even married them, and they tried to make laws against it and everything. There's just so much back and forth in this, so much trying to scribble laws to stop this, to stop that, let's not do this. And then when those slave masters died, the kids got the inheritance, mixed race kids now. So now they're going to France, getting educations, and they're shopping, and they're now a new bourgeoisie. And there's also free blacks as well. And the free blacks and the mulattoes, the mixed race, they were now feeling privileged and a different class, but they were always in between. The free whites got jealous of the mulattoes because of their inheritance. But also, they were happy for the black slaves to stay where they were. They wanted to keep them in slavery. They didn't care. And you just see so many betrayal in this book, and how they were working against Toussaint. It's a good read, but I just wanted to give you a brief introduction to the book. Hopefully that's triggered something in you. You want to find out what happened. You're interested. I mean, like it said, these guys, young South African students, their teacher said, you know what, go and read this book. You'll probably enjoy it. They read it, changed their lives. This book, like, thoroughly enjoyed it. It changed me. I'm reading it twice. It's given me so much, this book, like so much. But I just wanted to introduce that for the second part. We're going to go in. It's going to be a hard read. I might do that tomorrow and just go over it again, just focus. But you know, the Maroons, the runaway slaves, people who escaped and ran away over the years, over the decades, over the decades, ran away to the mountains, survived little raiding parties and such. When they joined up with the slave armies and Toussaint brought them all together. And I love the way Toussaint used to talk, man. Oh man, I wish I could read this whole book to you, but it's it's difficult to read because it's French. There's loads of French names, French things in there, and it's difficult to understand. It's a lot of googling, but you can get the gist of the actual story of what happened. And but when you see Haiti today, and like all the trees have been cut down and stuff like that, where the Maroons hid, and everything is just like, it's just been revenge on this place ever since for 220 years. It's just been revenge. Like, that place was thriving, and once again, just not letting us prove that we can do it just as good as they can. And you can't talk about these things because the average person gets upset. They're like, yeah, but we're not actually. It's the ruling classes, it's the governments, it's the super rich, it's the major companies. Follow the money. And then the armies who think that it's the government, but the government are run by the major companies and the families. And people take it personally, and they won't accept the truth, and they say, oh, why are you bringing that up for? It's history. And then, oh, but we should be proud of our country, and blah blah blah. It's just like, but these kind of people, they've done these things in the name, in your country's name, in your name. And when we're trying to talk about these things and bring it out, it's like we always have to disclaimer. We're not talking about the average person on the street. We're not talking about the normal folk. Everyone has good people, everyone has bad people, but this is what the West is like. it's just lies and corruption, and just everything is just a black hole which the whole world is just getting sucked into. And then you've got other countries who want to emulate the West, and they've taken up, and we're just on our way to just this is why the Most High has to come and step in and just say, you know what, that's enough. That's enough. That's enough. Because in these last days we're going to get a tiny taste. Most High is going to leave it to the last minute. We're going to get a small taste if we let these people say to us, oh, we're going to do it a better way, we're going to change everything, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, with the wonders of technology. All hail AI. And we're going to find ourselves in a trap. And this is where the Most High is going to say, see, I told you so. And that's when we're going to have to scream out for help. And that's when he's going to prove to the world, you see, my way is best. Only I can help you. I will change this. And that's not just about us. This is about the whole world now. Every eye shall see and every knee shall bow. This is not just about us. The Most High has a point to prove. Because these people, they never have the best intentions for everyone, just for the people, for the world's sake. And we always look to them, we always let them lead. And nobody's got the guts to stand up to them, because all bases are covered. It's impossible now. This is what God wanted. He wanted it to get to this impossible position. Because really and truly, we should be saying, you know what, who cares? You're filthy rich. You keep your riches. You keep your companies. You keep that. But stay away from governing. Stay away. Because you never have everyone the interest of the greater good. Greed and corruption and power is just too much. Like in Lord of the Rings, when people, they get the ring and it's like, and they're just staring down at the ring, and